So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is, if this is okay with everyone, is share with you 3 lessons or sort of hot tips, if you will, that I've learned through mistakes that I've made, things I've tried out over the last couple of years in increasing the inclusion and equity that is present in our organization. The reason I'm here is that I lead a nonprofit that trains young people, youth and young adults, to train others in issues of inclusion, equity, how to have tough conversations, and how to transform conflict for long-term and authentic relationship building. So authenticity, your theme word, Jade, is right in line with where I'm at with it, and like, what does that actually mean? How do we actually practice it? Over the last 2 years that I've been in my position, we've shifted the organization from being majority white staff, majority white, actually all white board, and majority white clients being served. We've shifted that entirely so that we now have a staff and a client base that represents the broader dynamics and identities present in Denver. This has been a process, and so what I'm going to share with you today are experiences that I've had specifically as it relates to increasing the amount of racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion in our organization, okay? I recognize that we all bring lots of identities to the table, and those identities are important. I bring lots of identities. The white folks who were comprised my board when I started all have lots of identities, and those are valuable and important. And in a country that is rooted in systemic oppression of people of color, it feels really important and in fact critical to center race as an identity in our work, because without doing that, if we get really good at disability and making space for people with disabilities, if we get really good at making space for women, if we get really good at making space for formerly incarcerated people, but we don't get really good at making shared spaces and shared leadership for people of different racial identities, we're missing the boat. We're not going to chip away at that systemic inequity that exists out in the world in a really effective way. So that's why we do that, okay? And I am a white woman in this work and am not always the best spokesperson for what it means to dismantle racism. But it is my work because white folks are the ones that are benefiting from racism, right? Step 1, commit to change, okay? All change starts with a commitment to do so. A lot of us are in sort of that pre-contemplation mode of like, I kind of think something might be able to look different in the way I'm doing things in my life, but I'm not really ready to take action on it. I encourage you to get to a place where you're ready to commit, to decide. I see that it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the thing we need to do in order to increase the impact we're having through our work and in our community. It is the right thing to do to increase the diversity of people around the table, whatever table that might be. But sometimes that's not enough to stay focused and stay committed. So the other thing that we thought about and we named was, what are the upsides for our business? Is there an increase in access to revenue? Is there an increase in access to impact? Those are kind of our 2 metrics, right? And by having a business case for inclusion, it helped us keep everybody at the table as we move forward in the changes that we were making. Hot tip number 2, which is notice the gaps, observe, attend to the facts as they are presented. Part of why I've been successful over the last 2 years is because I am in a decision-making position and because I run a small organization. So we were able to build it up and build in some different ways of working. So I think that is similar to a lot of y'all who are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, or working in small teams where you've got a lot of autonomy and where you're in a place where every next person you add to the team or every next client you get, you can make a choice to broaden the representation, whereas those of you who work for the city or for larger organizations or businesses, there is some challenge there. So what I'll say about noticing the gaps. When I came on, as I mentioned, I'm a white woman, so I came in, the other full-time staff person was also white. We had 3 board members, which is, for those of you who know nonprofits, not enough to get anything done, but all 3 of them were white. And I observed also that 2/3 of our most recently completed alumni identified as white as well. We had lots of identities represented in that. On just the board alone, those 3 people represented Jewish, Christian, gender fluid, young, old, owning class, working class. There was a robust diversity of experience, but not that element of representation racially. which felt really critical, and as I said, we had committed to. And so as I start observing those disparities, right? Those mismatch between our shared values and what our organization looked like, noticing them and naming them, right? Elevating them. Gosh, I'm thinking about, I see something going on here. Or as we survey our staff, or as we survey our clients, here's what we're seeing about the demographics, and referring that up to decision makers or reflecting on that yourself. The other piece of this, though, because I think it can be kind of easy to look around and be like, hey, these are almost all white folks. Like, what's up with that? But to then take the next level and say, where am I showing up in this? I was seeking out advice from people who looked like me. I was seeking out articles and blogs, podcasts authored by folks who shared my identities. I was being supported by a peer group that mirrored me. And in fact, mirrored me not just in terms of my racial identity, but in terms of almost all my identities, right? I was reading a lot of work by white women, a lot of, some of my closest friends, sort of my accountability supporters are queer white women who are from the Midwest and are my same age. Just basically talking to myself, right? Which is great and powerful. It's important to have peers who share your identities. And I had to do the humbling work of noticing and acknowledging that I was missing out, that I was insulating myself unintentionally, without clear focus. I was insulating myself from perspectives that were different from my own, and perspectives that could offer me challenge, offer me new insight, and offer me an opportunity to grow my business / nonprofit. I'm gonna just use business to make it all right. So what I'd invite you to do here is some reflection. They're also on your sheet, but I'm gonna read them out loud. So if you need to look at your calendar, please do. Who are the last 5 people you've had cultivation calls with, client meetings, prospecting, advice giving with? Just think about who they are. In the business context, as you've been seeking out resources to grow your skill set, your toolkit in your role, whatever that might be, write down the last 5 things you've consumed. Podcasts, article, New York Times piece. What are those most recent 5 pieces of information you've gleaned? And then as you think of that list of 10 data points, do their identities reflect your own? And there's not judgment here, one way or the other. And some identities aren't visible, or you might not know. And then as you think about this collection of information about your recent connections to people, content, ideas, what practices led you to have those encounters? So whether it's lead generation, cold calling, networking conversations, whether you call it a practice or not, whatever you do every day is a practice because you're doing it every day, right? So oftentimes we're engaging in patterns of behavior that are practices, but we don't call it that because we just do it on autopilot. So one of the things that I was reflecting on was one of my practices that I realized for networking was talking to my friends about the issues I was having at work and asking for their advice. Who do you know? Can you help me out? Can you connect me? It's an awesome way. That's why we have friends, right? It's why we have a network. That's why we have a community. That's why we're probably in this room, at least in part, right? And so that was one of my practices. And the reflection that I had was, if I want to expand the diversity of perspectives represented by my contacts, by who I'm meeting with, who I'm talking to, I'm gonna have to add in some new practices. I'm gonna have to think differently about how I approach those personal relationships. I'm gonna have to think differently about how I cultivate clients. What feelings, if any, come up for you as you do this reflection? I'll offer, when I sort of got held accountable, this was not my aha moment. Someone offered me this insight of, Megan, when's the last time you read something by a person of color? Megan, when's the last time you talked to somebody who was politically conservative in a meaningful way? So as I'm doing this reflection, the feelings that were coming up for me were not great. I was like, fuck you. I'm fine, right? That was my knee-jerk reaction, was like, what are you even offering? Like, I'm great. I'm doing a good job. Back off. And then after I got through that, was some shame. And And then after that came some sort of like, maybe like frantic, like I gotta get this right. I had this sort of frantic feeling of like, oh my gosh, like let me go through my phone and find the like 5 people of color that I trust and and I was like, no, calm down. Like that is not, let's chill out. And so once kind of I worked through some of those, and I offer these just to maybe normalize if that's something that you've ever come across in yourself as you do some of this reflection, and also maybe to make it okay to acknowledge like this is hard and we all react kind of emotionally and in ways that are not always logical. And it's certainly not a practice that you can do once and be done with. So I offer up this notice the gaps as a lesson and a practice to continue reflecting on. If what you want to see in your business is more of X, Y, or Z, think about why X, Y, or Z is not there right now. What are you engaging in that's taking up the space where X, Y, and Z could be? And explore some options to change it. The other kind of side of the coin on this notice it thing is ask Google for help, okay? This comes from one of our facilitators last summer. She's a young woman, identifies as African American. She just graduated from University of Northern Colorado, one of a handful of black students on campus. And she shared with us in confidence, as part of the staff training, that she frequently got asked by other students, by professors, by staff people, gosh, what's it like to be the only black person in the room? Can you tell me about that? Well-meaning question, well-intended, I'm sure. But her response to that question always, I'm gonna look at this, each time she had to weigh how honest should she be, she had to weigh how much should she share, and she had to consider whether she had the emotional bandwidth personally to handle whatever reaction that white person would have to whatever it is she decides to share. And her feedback to us was, this is emotional labor that I am doing for this white person's curiosity. And their curiosity is good and important, and that drive is valuable. But it puts her in a place, depending on the time of day, the relationship, the level of connection or stress she might be having, it puts her in a place where she may choose to do that labor, right? Like for me, in that context with our staff, we had a trust, and she decided that I want to share this personal experience so you all can better understand my lived experience. But for the most part, she's like, I don't want to go there when I'm just like walking on campus to a class. That's not my job. It's not what I want to do today. And so what she says, she sums up her feelings like this. She says, just Google it. Google exists for a reason. Just fucking Google it. She said, don't ask the one black person you know what it's like to be in a networking space with all white people. Ask Google. Don't ask your one gay friend how it is to go to a non-gay bar. Don't do it. Or do it, but do it with the understanding that what you're actually asking is for that person to educate you on their lived experience, and they may or may not want to. And the reality is there are lots and lots of folks sharing their perspectives online through blogs, through articles, through podcasts, through videos that offer that they have opted into doing the emotional labor of sharing with us what it is like to be a person of an identity that is marginalized in a space and in a world that doesn't honor that. And to start there. So this last question on this section is, what lived experiences are you curious about in this moment? Whose way of being in the world has your interest piqued? Who do you want to know better and understand more about? And would you be willing to commit to Googling it? Just Google it and read what comes up. The last practice that I want to share is practice listening. And I use the word practice a lot because we're almost all pretty bad at listening, like most of the time. Even when we think we're not doing a bad job, we're mostly almost always not great. And so what I invite you into is some lessons that I've learned around listening to feedback as it's given and accepting responsibility. Who here has used mirroring as a listening tool? So the way we practice it is very formulaic. Ashley, could we demo?
Yes. Sure, can you stand up?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Great. So, Ashley, I would like you to share with me what you had for breakfast.
I had 2 cups of coffee, and then an hour after that, a lox bagel with no capers.
So what I heard you saying, Ashley, is that you had 2 cups of coffee, and then about an hour later you had a lox bagel with no capers?
Correct.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Anything else that I missed?
No.
Anything else about how that felt for you, like in your day, to start out your day that way?
I don't usually eat breakfast, so that's a little odd.
Okay, so I based on what you have shared, I would imagine perhaps you felt a little full and maybe slightly uncomfortable since it wasn't your new normal routine. Is that right?
Yes.
Any other feelings that I missed?
Nope.
Great, thank you. Let's give it up for Ashley. Okay, so mirroring, you literally say what they said back to them. Then you check in. Is that right? Is there more? Say it again. Is that right? Is there more? Say it again, and then sum up what you heard and say, based on what you've shared, I would imagine you might be feeling blah, 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 and empathize with how you imagine they might be feeling. And then check in. Is that right? Is there more? Super formulaic, feels really goofy to do it, and I don't have time to make you all do it, but I swear to you, every time I've done it, every time I've had it done to me, I feel heard. The tension releases, the conversation slows down, and we're able to really see each other. So I invite you into that practice as well. Listening where you'd rather talk, and really hearing the feedback where you'd rather challenge or push back. It's not easy, and it's not a one and done kind of thing. Reflect on the last time you received feedback from somebody you cared about, either in the work setting or in a personal relationship. And what did that take for them? And also, what was it like for you to receive it? And I guess lastly, what would it be like to offer constructive, loving, empathic feedback to the people in your circle more regularly, if you're not already doing it? There are resources out there around equitable hiring practices and shifting from just making it like equal to actually making it equitable. This idea of equity is not that everybody gets the same thing, but everybody gets what they need for their needs to be met. And so we relied on that. We shifted our language in the application itself. We brought all of our marketing and even our job descriptions we've gotten them down to 10th grade reading level. We're trying to get down to 8th. Best practice is 6th, I think. 6th grade. I'm looking at the marketing people. And so that's one step. And it's not about dumbing down. I don't want you to hear that out of me. What I want you to hear is making it approachable and accessible. We also, some of the things that we've done is focus on highlighting the benefits in ways that appeal to the demographic we're looking for. So we really wanted to have some moms in the mix. And so for our summer, highlighting, one of the benefits is you can have your kid at camp. One of the benefits is, flexible training schedule or, whatever that might be. I know that my wife's the one that I learned most of this from, to be honest. But she wanted to hire an HR director who was older and seasoned and sort of looking for a sort of sunset career of 5 to 10 years. And so what she did is in the benefits package, put front and center 8% investment in your retirement. Great fit for seasoned professional. Used words to describe the person she wanted and highlighted the benefits that would draw in a person whose needs she wanted to meet. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then from the marketing side is just, you get creative, about, there's Latino Leadership Institute is one of my favorite places to market opportunities. Lots of other places where you can get beyond your network.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you all. Appreciate it.